Jack Mercer never planned to be in a line of fire, but a single choice in a rain-soaked street put him there, between a gunman's bullet and a stranger's daughter. What truth hides behind that moment, and who will it change forever? The man who stood between the bullet and the girl. The city seemed to hold its breath under the rain. It wasn't the kind that rushed in sheets, blurring vision, but the slow, steady fall that seeped into everything. The seams of coats, the cracks in sidewalks, the edges of thoughts. Street lamps stood like sentinels, their light trembling in the slick reflection of asphalt. Jack Mercer walked with his head down, not from weariness alone, but from habit. Years of moving through the world without drawing more attention than necessary. The paper grocery bag in his right hand was heavier than it should have been. Inside, beneath the carton of milk and a loaf of bread gone soft at the edges, lay a bag of marshmallows. Emily had texted just before his shift ended, asking for hot chocolate. She'd be home in her favorite sweater by now, probably sitting cross-legged on the couch, pretending to do homework while she waited for him. His boots made a soft slap in the puddles as he crossed under the dim halo of another streetlight. A bus roared past, sending a cool mist up from the gutter. Jack adjusted his grip on the bag and shifted his shoulders, feeling the pull and muscle stiff from hours on his feet. Ahead, the traffic light clicked from green to amber. Cars slowed, brake lights glowing like embers in the rain. That's when he saw her. A girl, older than Emily by several years, maybe 14, stood at the far curb. Her navy school coat was soaked at the hem, dark hair plastered to her cheeks. She was bent slightly forward, eyes fixed on something small and metallic lying in the street. A bracelet, silver, catching the light in short, watery glints. She stepped down off the curb. Jack's gaze shifted, trained instinct more than conscious thought, and caught the shadow moving in the alley just beyond her. A man, tall, narrow-shouldered, his hood pulled forward. The outline of his arm was unmistakable. It wasn't lifted in greeting. The black glint at the end of it turned Jack's stomach cold. He didn't remember dropping the groceries, but he heard the soft thud of bread hitting wet pavement, the roll of a tin toward the gutter. He was already moving, boots striking harder against the street. The first crack of the gun was both sharper and flatter than any sound belonged to a city night. Not a cinematic echo, just violence in its most immediate form. Heat slammed into his shoulder, spinning him half around, but he caught her coat, pulling her down against him. They hit the asphalt hard. Her gasp was lost in the ringing in his ears. Rain mixed with something warmer, running down his arm, the copper tang of it sharp in his throat. Jack forced himself upright enough to push her toward the cover of a parked car. "Stay down," he said, the words rough-edged. The man in the alley cursed, a flash of pale face before he melted back into shadow. Across the street, a figure in a tailored coat shouted into a phone, gesturing wildly for a car. Jack's vision narrowed. The girl was crouched low, one knee in a puddle, clutching the bracelet in her palm. Her knuckles were white. 3 minutes later, the black SUV skidded into view. The tires hissed on the wet asphalt, headlights sweeping across the street until they landed on him. The back door opened before the vehicle fully stopped. She stepped out like someone carved from stillness, tall, composed, her hair drawn back in a knot that the rain had barely disturbed. The long line of her coat moved with her stride, but her eyes were fixed only on the girl. Kneeling, she pulled her into an embrace that was both fierce and brief, as if time didn't allow for more. Then she looked up. Her gaze landed on him, blood running down his sleeve, his breath uneven, his weight shifted to his good arm. Something unreadable passed through her expression. From inside her coat, her hand came out holding a pistol, not trembling, not tentative, the kind of grip that came from knowing exactly what a weapon could do. "Step away from my daughter," she said, voice level but edged with something dangerous. The rain ticked against the barrel, each drop sliding into the space between them. The girl's mouth opened. "Mom," but the woman's attention didn't shift. Jack raised his good hand, palm out, the other still pressed against his wound. Sirens were growing louder now, their light just beginning to smear across the wet street. Her eyes didn't waver. It struck him then, through the haze of pain and cold, that she wasn't acting out of panic. This was calculation, protection honed into instinct, sharpened over years of having to act first and doubt later. The sirens rounded the corner, blue and red fracturing over the glistening pavement. Somewhere behind him, a door slammed. But here, in the narrow stretch of street between him and her, the world was distilled into the sound of rain on metal, the steady aim of her hand, and the truth lodged in both their chests. Neither trusted the other, and both had already risked something they couldn't take back. The sirens fractured the moment, but didn't dissolve the tension. Blue light bled across wet asphalt, flashing in the fine mist between them. Evelyn Marlowe's pistol stayed level at Jack until the first uniformed officer appeared, hand raised, palm out. "Ma'am, drop it." She didn't drop it. She lowered it slowly, like someone returning a blade to its sheath, her eyes never leaving him. Clara was still pressing to her side, her free hand gripping the girl's shoulder as though even in the presence of police, safety was something she had to create with her own body. Jack kept his hands where they could see them. The officer nearest him, young, water dripping from the brim of his cap, said, "You're bleeding. Sit before you go down." He sat on the curb, boots in the stream running along the gutter. Someone pressed gauze against his shoulder. Somewhere at his left, Evelyn's voice carried. "He was with her when I arrived. I can't speak to what happened before. It wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. It was worse. It was deliberate. A statement meant to live on paper. The ride in the ambulance was cold and too bright. The sirens were a wail behind glass, muted enough for his thoughts to be louder. Through, the medic said, as if the phrase could erase the pain. Jack closed his eyes, not to sleep, but to fix one image in his mind. The look on Clara's face before Evelyn pulled her away. When he woke, the world was quieter. The rain had softened against the window. He was in a hospital room that smelled faintly of antiseptic and wet wool from the coat left on the chair. His arm ached from the bandage's tight pull. There was movement in the doorway. Clara stood there, half hidden, a folded blanket in her hands. Her hair was still damp at the ends, her school coat replaced by a sweater too big for her. She stepped in, then froze when a shadow filled the space behind her. Evelyn's presence was like a change in temperature. She didn't enter. She placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder and steered her back without a word. Their voices, low and clipped, faded into the hallway. Detectives came that evening. 2 men in rain-darkened coats, one flipping a notebook open before he'd even introduce himself. They asked for a description of the shooter. Jack gave it, piecing together what he'd seen. The height, the narrow build, the way the hood had shadowed his face. But his memory was more sensation than detail. The glint of the gun, the shock in his shoulder. When the questions turned, why were you there? How did you know her? He felt the old heaviness settle in. I was walking home from work. He said evenly. I saw a kid step into the street. A man with a gun was about to shoot, and I got her out of the way. The older detective looked at him over the edge of the notebook. You're aware of who she is? Jack shook his head. Evelyn Marlowe, CEO of Marlowe Dynamics. She's had threats before. We need to consider whether this was targeted, whether you were involved. He almost laughed at that, but it came out as a short, sharp exhale. I've got an 8-year-old waiting for me at home. You think I plan to take a bullet for a stranger's kid? The detective just wrote something down. By night, the hospital was all dim corridors and the faint hum of machines. Jack lay awake, watching the rain streak the streetlights into blurred gold threads. He pictured Emily under her quilt, the one with frayed blue edges from her grandmother's hands. He wished he could be there to tell her good night. A knock came, soft, not the brisk rap of staff. He looked up. Evelyn stepped in, her coat damp, the scent of rain trailing her. In one hand, a slim leather folio, the other stayed at her side. Her gaze was level, assessing. I need to hear exactly what you saw, she said. I told the police. I'm not the police. He leaned back, studying her. Man with a gun, girl in the street. I moved her, got shot. That's it. Her expression didn't shift. Men don't put themselves in the path of a bullet for someone they don't know. He held her gaze. Sometimes they do, especially if she reminded them of their own. Something flickered, quick, there and gone. She closed the folio. "If your story changes, you'll let me know." She turned to leave, but Clara hesitated in the hall, her voice barely more than a breath. "Thank you." Then they were gone, and he was alone with the sound of rain on glass, wondering if the bigger threat was the man who'd pulled the trigger, or the woman who'd looked at him like she might. The rain had stopped by the time they discharged him. Not a gradual easing, but an abrupt end, leaving the street steaming faintly under a thin wash of sunlight. Jack adjusted the strap of the paper bag they'd given him with the prescriptions, the weight of it swinging lightly against his good leg. His shoulder throbbed with each step, but the pain was almost welcome. It gave him something to focus on that wasn't her face, her voice, or the sound of that pistol safety clicking off. He'd barely made it halfway down the block when a black SUV rolled alongside him, the hum of its engine unervingly quiet. The tinted passenger window lowered just enough to show her. "Evelyn Marlowe." "Get in," she said, as if it wasn't a question. Jack hesitated, but the rear door opened, and he saw Clara sitting there, watching him. Not with fear exactly, but with something unreadable, as if she'd been told to study him the way you'd study a photograph you weren't sure you could trust. They didn't speak on the ride. The driver was a wall of muscle in a dark suit, his eyes fixed ahead. The city unspooled beyond the glass, brick tenements giving way to the sharper edges of the financial district. The quiet felt dense, like a third person in the car. When they stopped, Jack stepped out into the shadow of a building that was all glass and steel, the kind of place that didn't just keep the world out, it erased it. Inside, the air smelled faintly of cedar and something sterile, and every surface seemed designed to reflect the smallest detail back at you. In the private elevator, Evelyn spoke without turning her head. You saw his face. "I need you somewhere safe until he's found." Jack's jaw tightened. "You think he's after me?" "I think if they were watching her, they might have been watching you." The penthouse was more like a museum than a home. Open space, clean lines, everything in its place. But in one corner of the living room, a small table was littered with colored pencils and sheets of half-finished sketches. The only sign that a 14-year-old lived here. "You'll stay in the guest suite," Evelyn said. "Your daughter will be brought after school." "I didn't agree to this," Jack said, his voice steady but not raised. "You don't have a better option." She left before he could argue. Emily arrived just before sunset, her small figure stepping hesitantly into the high-ceiling space. The moment she saw him, she ran, wrapping her arms around his waist. "What's going on?" she whispered. "Just for a little while," he said. "We're visiting." She pulled back to look at him. "This isn't visiting. This is hiding." He didn't answer. Later, Jack found himself in the kitchen, making tea out of habit. Evelyn was at the far counter, typing on a laptop, her posture as exact as her words. "You don't strike me as someone who lets strangers stay in your home," he said. "I don't," she replied, still typing. "But you're not a stranger to my daughter." It was the closest thing to an olive branch he'd heard from her. That night, the sound of low laughter drifted down the hall. Emily was on the living room floor with Clara, their knees almost touching as they sketched on the same sheet of paper. A stuffed rabbit sat between them like a silent referee. Evelyn passed through on her way to the study, pausing for half a breath before moving on. Jack stayed in the shadow of the doorway, letting the sound settle into him like warmth. The next morning, Roth, the head of security, spread photos across the dining table, blurred stills from traffic cameras, the shooter's figure captured mid-stride. "He was near your building 2 days before the attack," Roth said. "We can't prove he knew who you were, but it's not coincidence." Jack studied the image, the grainy outline of the man's hooded head, the set of his shoulders. He could almost hear the rain from that night in the photo silence. Days passed, the city outside turning into a backdrop he barely touched. Mornings were tea and toast with Emily. Afternoons, the girls claimed the living room for their drawings, their conversations hushed but easy. Evenings, Jack sometimes found Evelyn on the balcony, her hair catching the last light, her hands resting loosely on the rail. One night, he stepped out to join her. "You ever think about leaving it all behind?" he asked. She didn't look at him. "Every day." There was something in her tone, flat but honest, that made him want to ask more, but he didn't. On the fourth evening, Roth brought something new, The bracelet Clara had risked the street for wasn't hers. The clasp was engraved with E.M., Evelyn Marlowe. She doesn't wear jewelry in public, Roth said. Too easy to track. Whoever left it there wanted her to go after it. The air in the room felt colder. Jack thought of Clara's hand gripping it that night, her knuckles white, her eyes too wide. Later, Evelyn found him on the balcony again. She knows it's not hers, she said quietly. She's keeping it to herself because she thinks I'll worry less. Jack looked at her, the city lights flickering in her eyes. Kids think that way. They carry the weight for you, but it's never theirs to carry. Her gaze lingered on him, not guarded for once, as if weighing whether to say something more. It was just after midnight when Roth knocked, his voice clipped. You need to see this. The security feed showed the street below, slick with fresh rain. A lone figure stood across from the building, motionless, face shadowed under his hood. Jack didn't need Roth to tell him who it was. The man wasn't hiding. He was waiting. The storm rolled back in just before dawn, wind-driven rain striking the glass in steady, forceful bursts. Jack woke to the faintest tremor in the floor beneath his feet, not thunder, but movement. Then the lights flickered once, twice, and went dark. In the sudden dim, the penthouse felt cavernous. The green glow of emergency exit signs cast long shadows down the hall. A low chime sounded once. Then again, an alarm not meant for guests. Roth's voice came, quiet but clipped. They're in. Evelyn appeared from the direction of Clara's room, her coat half on, hair pulled tight, one hand gripping her daughter's arm. Clara was pale, still in the oversized sweatshirt she'd slept in. Emily trailed behind them, eyes wide, her small hand instinctively reaching for Jack's. He took it without looking away from Roth. Safe room. Now. Roth herded the girls ahead, but Evelyn hesitated just long enough to cross to a low console table near the wall. From a shallow drawer, she pulled a compact black pistol and held it out to Jack. You know how to use this? Yes. There was no thank you, no hesitation, only trust, given as if it had been decided long before this night. They stayed in the hall outside the safe room after Roth sealed it from within. The air was heavy with the metallic scent of the storm pushing through the cracked balcony doors. They'll come from 2 points, Evelyn said, her voice calm but low. Kitchen and balcony. She took one side of the hall, Jack the other. The rain roared beyond the glass. Somewhere in the dark, a footstep shifted against tile. The first shadow appeared in the kitchen entrance, tall, wiry, but pushed back enough to reveal the pale, angled face Jack remembered. The shooter's eyes met his, cool and unhurried. You shouldn't have gotten in the way, the man said. You were aiming at a kid. The man's mouth curved faintly. You don't know who she is. From the corner of his vision, Jack caught Evelyn stiffen, but she didn't speak. A crash of glass behind him. Another man forcing the balcony doors. Jack pivoted, the gun heavy in his hand. The intruder lunged, the impact jarring his shoulder, sending pain flashing hot through the healing wound. They struggled, their breath harsh in the dark, until Jack slammed him into the wall hard enough to feel the air go out of him. Evelyn's shot cracked through the hall, forcing the first man back into the kitchen shadows. Jack shoved the balcony intruder out onto the slick tiles, rain soaking both of them in seconds. The city glared in brief flashes of lightning. Somewhere inside, he heard Evelyn's voice, low, tense, and the man's in reply. She's not the person you think. Jack came back in fast. Evelyn was pinned against the wall, the shooter's arm across her collarbone, her own gun wrenched from her grasp. Jack didn't speak. He just moved. The pistol came up in his hand, steady, the shooter's eyes locked with his, pale and unblinking. For a moment, the storm outside seemed to hold still. Then Evelyn drove her elbow into the man's ribs. He faltered, and Jack was there, shoving him hard into the opposite wall. Roth and 2 more of his team burst in from the stairwell. The shooter didn't resist. His gaze lingered on Evelyn as they cuffed him, as if there were more to say, but he let himself be led away. When it was over, the rain seemed softer, like the storm had spent itself. The penthouse smelled of wet air and gun oil. Clara and Emily came out of the safe room together, crossing the hall at once. Clara folded into her mother's arms. Emily pressed close to Jack's side. For a while, no one said anything. It didn't feel like the right time for words. The following days were quiet. The police wanted statements. Roth kept his answers clipped. Evelyn never told Jack what the man had meant about her, and Jack never asked. Not yet. Instead, they moved through a gentler rhythm. The girls spent afternoons on the balcony when the sun returned, their sketchbooks open between them. Jack learned Clara's laugh. Rare, quick, almost a surprise to herself. Evelyn started taking her coffee in the kitchen, rather than behind her closed office door. On their last morning there, Evelyn walked him to the door. The SUV waited downstairs to take him and Emily home. "You kept her safe," she said. "So, did you?" he replied. There was a pause, one that might have been too long if either of them had been ready to leave it empty. She reached into her coat, producing a small white envelope. "If you ever need anything for you or for her." He didn't take it, not right away. She set it on the side table, the corner of it resting against the grain. That evening, Emily asked if they'd see them again. Jack didn't answer at first. Instead, he took her to park just as the sky shifted toward gold. Clara was there, running toward the swings. Evelyn followed more slowly, her coat unbuttoned against the breeze. The girls met in the middle, their laughter spilling across the grass. Jack and Evelyn stood a few paces apart, both watching. "You're not what I expected," she said at last. "Neither are you." This time, the silence was easy. The wind carried the faint scent of rain on its way. When the first drops fell, neither of them moved to leave. If this story touched you, subscribe or share where you're watching from. These stories matter.